SONA 2016 has come and gone, and like we expected, it was a very eventful ceremony. Now, I'm joined in studio by Sbusiso Shabalala and Ziyanda Stirman to break down a little bit of what we saw yesterday. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
So yesterday, like we expected, things were out of hand, inside and outside. And I think let's just maybe start about, your impressions of the event. Ziyanda, if you can start, I do understand that you do work inside Parliament.
So I think at least it was a lot calmer than last year. I think we were expecting disruptions to a certain extent, and security was certainly ramped up for the event. But I think it went a lot smoother, and just with a lot less aggression and a lot less tension.
Yeah, I mean, I guess people saw it coming, and I guess it was probably less effective for the EFF to do what they did. I mean, I really found it interesting that Lekota kind of did the one-man thing. And I mean, even before that, I think in a pre-interview during the day, he said that the president would not speak until he answered the question.
And what do you think, that kind of signature is, to kind of leave and to start the walkouts quite soon already? Do you think an event like SONA is starting to lose its credibility?
People can argue the benefits or the disadvantages of walking out quite early, but it definitely puts you out there in the public's mind, and to a certain extent journalists also follow those politicians who walk out and ask them why.
I mean, I take the view that SONA has become very interesting over the past sort of year or so, because traditionally the SONA has always been a very dull speech. The president comes, people dress and roll up on the red carpet, but it really has, as Ziyanda says, become the theatre of politics. I mean, I guess the problem with disruptions, and particularly the EFF's sort of case, is that you kind of risk, almost becoming sort of one-trick pony party. Where I think last year's disruption had real impact. I think it really brought the case around Kandla to the public realm in a really, really good way. Felt like this year was kind of shooting into the dark and hoping that something would land.
I think to add to that, I think what was also very important is that the EFF, I think, was doing this and doing the disruption for their constituency. They had said already at the Constitutional Court that they were, going to ask a set number of questions dealing with Nene and corruption and the Guptas, and they weren't, going to allow President Zuma to speak unless he answered that. And so in that sense, they kept their word. But also were able to do it where they pushed the brink as far as humanly possible before, Thandi Modise and Baleka Mbete, essentially said, we actually have the business of the house to get to. So in that sense, it's a smart tactic in the sense that they're able to, disrupt and leave and have their own alternative SONA outside of the actual house chamber.
The drama that we had last year.
Exactly. But also, because they weren't thrown out, they also are able to participate in next week's debates, which is something that was always up in the air last year because of the way that they were thrown out.
Someone mentioned yesterday, as they were presenting their SONA, their alternative SONA outside, that for them to leave now as public servants, is that not problematic in itself, that you decide, okay, well, the event is over now for us, we've walked out, and we're not a part of it, when the proceedings were still going on? Do you think that that's a valid concern?
A lot of people who support the EFF and probably many other opposition parties were very much sort of engaged even before the address. So you saw a lot of people protesting on the street yesterday, a lot of people offering commentary on what they expected to do. And I think in that sense, it's really become a very interactive thing as opposed to it just becoming the address. And so for me, what's interesting also is that, I mean, when I was 10, SONA would used to be, somehow during the day, I think, the afternoon. It's since moved to the evening. And all it was just a speech. It would happen for an hour and a half, people would leave. There'd be pre-roll and people, standing on a red carpet. But now it almost feels like the whole day sort of builds up, right? People are sort of debating, people are protesting. And I think that's very good for our democracy.
So what do you think about the kind of protests that were happening? We didn't have as many injuries as far as we know as we had last year, but it was still, the energy was very, very hectic and violent. So what is your take on that?
I think it's definitely a sign of just where we are as a country in terms of our politics at the moment. That there's so much happening and that people want to mobilize and are willing to come together, and sometimes even against each other in such a public space. I wouldn't necessarily think that it's worrying. I think that the escalation of security and just, the barbed wire, just I think a very, very heightened and almost paranoid sense of security is something to worry about ever so slightly when it comes to our protest culture.
And do you think that kind of that distance from the parliament and, like you mentioned, people are engaged from the time they wake up. From yesterday, the energy was very high. But there's just this constant push, you know, to keep people out.
What is the institution of Parliament doing to promote the culture of openness, to promote a culture of almost saying to people, yes, this is a thing that happens here with everyone sitting inside and, you know, people sitting in the gallery, members of the press, obviously reporting on this. But everything around that should relatively be open. Of course, there are security considerations that need to be taken. But I mean, the idea that you have so much security presence, as Zian almost says, almost to, you know, kind of get people scared of even engaging or even wanting to go as near, it's a very, very worrying trend. I mean, I think the student protests last year taught both Parliament and the executive a thing about, you know, about how accountability is not something that you just slide from. That people can actually come to the House and demand accountability.